Right.
Yeah. And
So
I had
what year,
reason.
What year did you move here?
I moved here in, I think it was early 86. No, mid-86.
Okay.
Mid-86. I got through my undergraduate years finally. It took me 13 years, good God. I kept dropping out.
Yeah.
Many things were important to get done, and schoolwork wasn't all of it. And I only just self-diagnosed with ADHD a year ago, so everything makes sense in retrospect.
Yeah.
And I moved to the Bay. I took about a year going, God, this is a city, isn't it? Woo, look at those big tall buildings. And then started at the Institute. And then my path was pretty well, I didn't know it yet exactly, but my path was laid out before me. Once I walked in the door of that place, then the connections that I began to make are the connections that brought me here, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, and the reason I like to talk about, first impressions and just ideas of that people have about the place. I like to know, I'm a transplant as well, and I like to know other people's, what you come here with in your mind, and then what that turns into. And it's not, if you leave a little bit of space for an open mind, all sorts of things can happen. I also want to say I've never heard anyone describe the place as miraculous, and I love that. Thank you.
People say, "Oh, it's really different. It's all it used to be." Well, it's not. It's not. Nothing is like it used to be. That is all true. And if you asked me, would I go back to the 70s? And if you asked me if I would go back to the 80s or 90s, I would probably say yes. Honestly, there were things about the city at those times that were extraordinary. History building moments. Today in the city, the history building is going on down at Twitter, and it's devolutionary, right? But right now, I still drive across the Bay Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge into San Francisco and say, wow, I live here. And the light is still beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
And this place has a history that this moment doesn't erase, and it has a future that we built. So
together.
That's how I feel about it.
To the extent that I would personally go back to, let's say, the 80s or the 90s, my thing is, I want to see those times in different places, and especially here, as adult me.
Right.
The places where I was a teenager and was forming, or in my early 20s, I want to see those places in those times as me now.
I know. That's
what a trip that would be.
That's an exciting idea.
To maybe appreciate it differently or to understand it differently, but because we can't time travel, I guess all we can do is hold on to the past, preserve the past, study the past.
Study it, try to talk to the people who were there and filter their memories into things that we can understand and talk about and add to the discourse now.
To make it all make sense.
Well, one of the things that I've been saying for a long time, decade at least now, is, the history didn't start with the internet, but the way we try to understand practically anything now is mediated by the internet, which, brings us a lot of options and perspectives and things that would have been hard. We would have had to go to the library at least to get into that space before. But now, if it didn't get documented when it happened and it wasn't a big deal enough to have been documented after the fact, you lose. The history on the internet is very, very broad. It's not very deep. Right. And people need to understand, especially activists today, that there have been activist forebears, busy activist forebears for many decades. And I stand on the shoulders of people who got things done that allowed me to have the life I've had.
Right.
We should never forget that. Who were the really freaking brave people who stepped up when you could still get thrown in an insane asylum easily for being who we were. So I want no one to forget that that's been the path, because that also makes today a little less surprising and allows us to think there must be a strategy, because there's already been a strategy.
Right.
And we got to marriage equality through this kind of nonsense.
Through them, 100%.
So
yeah.
I hate that we have to do it again. Jeez.
Right.
Seems like a waste of energy. But on the other hand, clearly it's not a waste of energy. What else are we going to do?
Right. Those were the folks who, to the extent that they were envisioning now.
Yeah, exactly.
Their future is our present.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And were they, did they think that, Roe v. Wade was going to go with the same chap? Nobody quite predicted
right.
the sort of storm of nonsense and opprobrium that so many of us are going to have to deal with. But we have to remember what we had to learn in the 70s is that allyship helps each of us get the message where it needs to go.
Right.
So here we are again.
Yeah.
I hope I don't forget all the meetings I went to in the 1970s before I can start to document them.
Right. Well, Carol, I think that's all the questions I had up to the point where you got your foot in the door at Good Vibrations. Can we maybe pick up there?
Yes.
Okay, let's hear that story.
So, in order to understand what I got my foot in the door of, let me just tell you the origin myth of Good Vibrations.
Sure.
I don't think it's a myth either. I think it's real.
Right. Myths aren't, anyway.
Yeah.
That's a whole. I minored in philosophy, so
I was going to say I could hear at least a partial degree talking in that question. The subtext was there.
Myth does not equal fabricate. Yeah.
No. Myth is an accretion of what we need to understand and carry something further. Stories.
To make sense.
Stories. Yeah. So, Joni Blank, it turned out after Joni Blank died, she died a few years ago. It turned out after she died, learning even a little more about her than I already knew, that she had been on some kind of enemies list for being pro-choice before Roe v. Wade.
Like a J. Edgar Hoover?
Well, yeah,
kind of thing,
some list of let's watch those activist gals kind of list. And I'm sure they were all watched. We know that from the Janes documentary. Right. And anyway, Joni was interested in sexuality as well as reproductive justice, and as so many of us were. She was a feminist. This was the second wave feminism. I didn't say much about second wave feminism before, but it was pretty exciting discourse. And, it was the mix of second wave feminism included, the people that we now understand and call TERFs, all the way to people who wanted to shake up the patriarchy completely, but then come out the other end, having everyone, being able to masturbate to orgasm and dancing in the streets. There was a lot of points of view, a lot of agendas, some of which would not actually fit on any agenda any of us could ever write down. And Joni became involved in San Francisco Sex Information, the sex hotline, which still exists in some form today. I was involved in it back in the late 80s, early 90s too. She was involved in, and here's where the myth starts, a group of women who came together at UCSF, the medical school, University of California, San Francisco. The med school had a pre-orgasmic women's group led by Lonnie Barbach, the famed feminist sex therapist who wrote probably one of the very first books about female orgasm. And Joni was one of the facilitators in these groups. And she heard over and over again when they got to about the second or third week of the group, and suggested that the women who had already disclosed how little they knew about arousal, how little they knew about their own bodies, how really little partners knew about any of that, etc. So implicating sex education and repression and lack of information into the problem. We did that. We got the sociology out of the way the first couple of weeks. Then we're suggesting masturbation and vibrator masturbation, because masturbation with a vibrator is an efficient way to masturbate. It's not the only way.
Right.
Not everyone likes how it feels, but many people do.
Yeah.
And it's efficient. So People who thought they couldn't have orgasms are often shown when they use a vibrator that, oh, I can.
Lo and behold.
I can have one.
Yes.
Maybe I could have more. Maybe I could have them in different ways. And then they're on their path, right?
And that changes everything.
It changes everything because people who couldn't have orgasms, certainly women in those days, were like, well, I guess there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with the state of sex education and, and sexism. Those are the kinds of things that you really ought to be, sparing your ire for, not yourself and your problems and flaws, because that's not why you're having this experience or not having this experience, to be clear.
Right.
So go check out a vibrator and come back and tell us how it went. And the women would be all, I could never go into one of those places. And now, let's just be clear that in the 1970s, there were plenty of women who went into those places. They weren't afraid of them, or if they were afraid of them, they were like, I want a vibrator anyway. I would go in and I would be like, this is so sexist. What do they carry? I was one of those. I'll cross that line. I crossed a couple lines already. I'll cross some more now. Because I think that that's part of the whole the arc of my life is crossed a line. Didn't die. Let's try another one. Let's try another one.
Yep.
Let's try another one. And so here I am with you today. It's been fabulous line crossing that led me here. The path has been wiggly, but it has been a path. And so Joni heard people say this over and over again. Well, we could never go into one of those places. And she knew what they meant. She meant dirty bookstores, right? And she was like, we need a different kind of place. Now, there was already one different kind of place that existed in the United States. It was Eve's Garden in New York. I mentioned Betty Dodson, the mother of masturbation, before. And actually, she was mainly its very best influencer. I don't think she invented it herself, but when she discovered it, she knew she had something important to communicate to the world about.
She had her finger on something.
Yes! I think we could say on the pulse. Without the pulse, we wouldn't have engorgement. I think yes, that's right.
Got my pun in.
You got your pun in, and it's a good one. When you could visualize the pun, so much the better. When you're like, oh, that's like Wordle on acid. That's great, but this might be better. So Betty Dodson had spoken about masturbation to a National Organization for Women conference in the early 70s, and there was a woman there who went, oh, I think I'll go get a vibrator. That sounds like a good idea.
Okay.
So she went to Macy's. And she went to the home, the personal care aisle or the small appliance aisle or, wherever all of these things that are in the Antique Vibrator Museum used to be sold before there were any sex shops at all. Right? Because they were integrated into the world of consumables as far back as the turn of the 20th century. Okay. So anyway, all of that.
I did not expect that.
Old school these things are. Nobody knows except the people who found out since. But the important thing was that this woman, whose name was Dell Williams, walked into Macy's, found a pile of vibrators, picked up a magic wand, I believe it was, took it to the counter, and the staff member behind the counter said, what are you going to do with this? And she was like, I'm getting sexually harassed in Macy's in the small appliance aisle. Well, they didn't start using the word sexually harassed for another couple of years. That came from Cornell, I think. But anyway, she was like, I don't want other women to have this experience. I'm tough enough, but I don't want those shy women to have to come in here and get sexually harassed. I'm going to start a place. So she started Eve's Garden New York.
Okay.
Joni knew about it, I'm sure, but there was nothing on the West Coast except a few dirty bookstores, and in San Francisco they were mostly gay dirty bookstores. So that doesn't mean that they wouldn't have been, erotically completely irrelevant for women, because there are some women who like that stuff. But they're me being one of them. but there they were, and Joni was like, this is what I need to do. I need to make a space where women feel comfortable coming to ask their questions, to look at the curated display of, I don't know, about 6 sex toys to begin with. And her very first store was about the size of a postage stamp in the Mission District. It was not too far away from the women's building. It was sort of a women's neighborhood in the 70s.
The Mission, what year?
1977.
77,
yeah,
okay.
In about a month, close to a month, we'll be having our 45th anniversary. That's right. Six. Oh, whatever. I can't do math in my head right now. I'm thinking about history. I'm not thinking about math. Anyway, 1977 in March, Ocento, the women's bathhouse, was nearby. The Artemis, the women's cafe, was nearby. There was a women's bookstore. It was, if there was a women's NABE, it was along Valencia.
Our current episode is on a place that's going to be opening on 16th Street in the old Esta Noche spot. Have you heard about this?
No, what is it?
It's going to be called Mother. It's going to be a bar. It's going to be a bar for femme and women, queer-centered people. The woman,
fabulous.
Yeah, the woman Malia Spaniel, who owns the Parkside and owned Pops before that. She's keeping the Parkside, but she's opening this spot. And so she talked about a lot of this history. I happen to know the history, but I don't think a lot of people do. The Mission was kind of Dyke Central, and
it was kind of Dyke Central, and it was,
kind of like the women identifying answer to the Castro.
Exactly.
In a way.
There's Castro, there's a couple of hills with nice houses on them, there's Dolores Park, and then there's Women's Landia.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's other Landias very, very, very nearby and woven throughout, because it was clearly the Mission was already a Latinx neighborhood back then as well.
Right.
So Joni starts her postage stamp of a store with a handful of vibrators, lubricant. That was important. You couldn't just get lubricant easily in those days, so that was a big deal. And some books and some. I went on a visit to San Francisco in probably '83 or '84. To that Good Vibrations.
And you went to that store, okay.
And it was teeny tiny, and it was mind-blowing, and it just got bigger and more mind-blowing, and now there are, multiple stores on a couple of coasts, and it's still mind-blowing if you've never been.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's mind-blowing to everyone, but it certainly is mind-blowing if you've never been into a place where, in a shame-free way, all the things are just sitting out, not in a pile in their boxes like Dale Williams discovered in Macy's, but out on the shelf where you can turn the vibrator on and check out how it vibrates. That was an innovation that Joni had. That was a really important one, because who knew what these things even were in those days, except those people who still owned one of these vibrators that we're sitting amongst today that they had acquired in 1958.
Yeah.
So there was the Vibrator Museum born, also because Joni had a few of these antiques herself. Flea markets and such was where you could get them in those days. Now it's eBay, of course. Or people donate them to us. They come in with a brown paper bag, set it on the counter, and say, "Found this in my grandma's house." And leave. So
that's good. They made the connection,
I
though.
know.
It's great.
Super sweet. They're like, this is important somehow. Is there a place for it? Yes, there is a place for it. And many of the things that you see around you in this Vibe Museum got donated by people. So that's pretty sweet. About 6 vibrators on a little tiny shelf. I think it might have been an old encyclopedia shelf from, the 1920s. With a sign above it that said Antique Vibrator Museum.
This is at the postage size
shop. And a postage stamp sized museum.
Okay, right.
And I felt a little bad for the people who came from far, far away to see the museum, only to find there were only 6 things in it.
Yikes.
But were there those 6 things in the museums in their hometown? No.
You got to start somewhere.
You got to start somewhere. So here we are now. But
was that first museum? Was that also Joni's idea?
Yeah, that was. Joni wanted people to understand, and remember, she was really aiming at an audience of women. So I want to say something, complicate that in a second, but let me answer your question. Joni's idea with this museum was to help women understand that this wasn't a brand new thing that no women had ever experienced or explored before, that there were generations of use of vibrators on the part of some women. We don't know if grandmas only got these to, work on their lumbago or whatever it was, and didn't know about the clitoris,
right.
the vibrator and the clitoris, or if many of the women who had vibrators back in the day knew perfectly well what it was that they had, and just said, "Oh, my lumbago, got to have one of these," and went home and did what they did.
Yeah.
So we'll never know that. This information is, if it was in all the letters and diaries, the great grandkids took it out back and threw it in the dumpster. It's gone. But we do know that plenty of women in the 70s were like, "Oh, that's kind of technological, and it's a machine." It's like, yes, the machine is your friend if you want it to be. So years before Siri started talking to us about the meaning of life, there were little machines that could help us have orgasms. And Joni wanted to make sure that women understood that they weren't being asked to change human nature completely there in the 1970s. We weren't at the end of history yet. We were living in history, as we used to say. And we still are, but it was really a meaningful phrase in those days. Now, Joni made good vibrations for women, but almost immediately, men started showing up, putting their nose around the door, like kind of Kilroy was here. There's the fingertips and their nose stick in the door, saying, "Can I come in here? I don't like those other places either."
Oh, okay.
Well, who knew? Because those other places were made by men for men, and they must have been perfectly pleasing to men because men got what they wanted. And there was there's a little bit of a simplistic through line about patriarchy plus in 1970s feminism, without delving too deeply into late stage capitalism. And it wasn't until the anarcho-feminists of the 1980s that we got a little more sophisticated understanding about why the places were the way they were in the first place, and why men might also have as many questions about sex as women had,
right. Which
wasn't the way that the discourse and the understanding was unraveling.
Okay.
And instead, we got, the men made the store that they wanted, and that's too simplistic. And plenty of men were like, "We like what you've done here. Is there anything for me?" And we were like, "Yes, you can buy this one of 6 vibrators and put it on the head of your penis, and it'll feel great." Which was true as far as it went.
Right.
And eventually, both the industry and the way that Good Vibrations did things caught up with, we are a place for people of all genders who want what we offer. And so let's see what we might not be carrying that they would want. And here we are now. It's the 21st century, and we're a little bigger, partly because of that exact embrace of diversity and sexual experience, which nobody who started Good Vibrations had a full scope on, but then nobody comes through the educational system in the United States with a full scope on this. Maybe a few do now,
right?
But that's not what it's set up for. And even then, as we've talked about, it's under attack now.
Yeah.
So Joni needed to understand this through the point of view of people who were like, "We appreciate this, but listen, there's more to it than this." And
the spectrum is broad.
I so appreciated hearing this part of the story when I got my foot in the door, because of course this rang a bell to me of you'll stop being bisexual when you figure out who you really are nonsense, and allowed me to say, I might have a role to play in the way that we develop and think about these things. So I started working here in 1990.
Wow. Okay. At the spot in the Mission?
At the spot in the Mission, which by that time had moved to a 4 postage stamp sized store. It's where the Buffalo Exchange is now, I think. It was on
down Valencia.
Yeah, Valencia and 23rd.
Third?
Right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that was it. That was the 3rd location. They moved into that store a month before the Loma Prieta earthquake. Susie
Okay.
Bright was still working there at that time, the great feminist pornographer, and then some, Susie Bright, who was a staff member throughout the 80s. And she said, yeah, we moved in just in time for the quake to knock all the shelf models off of their little shelves.
No.
Oh, yeah, a lot of vibrators on the floor to pick up. But, we all picked up after the Loma Prieta and moved on, right?
Isn't that what they say earthquakes do, is vibrate?
Well, they do.
So the earth was like, you think that's a vibrator?
Yeah, we'll show you. So there's two kinds of vibration that we talk about routinely, and one of them is buzzy.
Okay.
But one of them is a much deeper kind, sort of a surface vibration. Doesn't penetrate, if you will.
Are we talking earthquakes or sex?
We're talking about sex, although,
Okay.
yeah. We're talking about vibrators.
Good.
And then there's the more, the deeper vibration that is stronger, or a vibrator with a larger head is gonna get more area and send the vibration a little deeper. And deeper sensation, different sensations come from these two kinds of vibration.
Okay.
Earthquakes are much more like the deeper kind. Not exactly like.
Yeah.
If somebody gets through their next fairly large earthquake by, ducking, covering, holding on, and pressing their body to the ground,
and having
to
an orgasm,
what happens, then I know a person
More
who started.
power to him.
I know a person who started masturbating the minute he felt Loma Prieta coming on.
Oh, wow.
Because he wanted to know how it would feel.
How do you have the wherewithal?
Well,
I don't understand, because great for him.
Good
but
Vibrations is here for everyone, but
Yes.
there is no question that there is a sexuality community who steps up and orients themselves and surrounds themselves, with sexual whatever.
Yeah.
Thought.
Right.
Practice.
Right.
Community. Friends. Many friends. Friends with benefits. He's one of those.
Okay, got it. Front of mind.
Front of mind and a kind of scientist.
Yeah, I only have one free hand, but I'm applauding, because I'm like, when I think there's an earthquake, I'm like, okay, great.
Yeah.
Not the first thing I think of.
Yeah, I've always been inspired by his I won't call it leadership exactly, but by his example. Yeah. I don't think we're going to get everyone to overcome their fear of earthquakes by masturbating. That's a bridge too far. But
hearing it might help someone.
But overcoming your fear of sex and experiencing something that seems out of control to you, which of course is an issue for many people, not all, but many. And these days, maybe even more so, when people think they're looking at sex ed documentary when they're watching porn, they're not documentaries.
Yeah.
Let's get some media literacy here. Right. Oh, wait. We're not allowed to have media literacy or books in our libraries either. Okay, so I'm sorry, I just keep coming back to the present. I'm trying to talk history with you.
It's okay.
And in fact, the most radical thing that Joni probably did was making sure that what we did at Good Vibrations when anybody walked in the door was to greet them comfortably and be a comfortable person to show them around, answer their questions. And that is a model that so many people have never had. The number of people who walk in here and we get to the point in the discussion where we find that they have never spoken to their sex partner, life partner sometimes, about the things they're asking us.
Right.
Is still mind-blowing to me, because theoretically there are resources around us now. We're not the only one. There was a moment when people might have thought we were the only sex resource. Even then it wasn't true, but we were the most commercial, the most visible.
Yeah.
And still it takes a certain degree of nerve to walk in the door. Joni used to have the windows completely obscured. You couldn't look inside the store, and we're
Right.
like, why not, Joni,
open
be
it.
proud?
Yeah.
And and we do know, it is open now.
Yeah.
But Joni was like, you have no idea how many women will not walk in this place
'Cause they
if
don't wanna
they
be
think
seen.
someone can look in the window and see them
Yeah.
and hear. And those women need us more than the ones who were, like holding up the vibrator for all to see and yelling, I found my girlfriend Wanda.
Right.
Those people will find things to do sexually because they're open to it in a particular kind of way that
Right.
other people don't know is possible for them.
I'm going to say something, and I don't think it's too bold, but you tell me what you think.
All right.
That one of the ways the mission of Good Vibrations could be described to make folks feel less alone.
I don't think that's wrong. I think that's absolutely right. And even if they are, masturbation-only introverts.
Right. It's to know that this is, first of all, this is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something to be celebrated and done well, to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, to me, that's, feeling a sense of, place and security and confidence and less alone, less, open to like, am I crazy? And should I be ashamed?
There
Like,
are tools
no.
and guidebooks, just like in the kitchen. You're not the only person who doesn't know how to make a casserole. You can learn how. And the shame that's instilled in people, and it comes from two main directions, right? It comes from shame discourse.
Mm-hmm.
If you have sex before marriage, you're like a piece of gum on the bottom of someone's shoe. Abstinence only nonsense. How do those people who think of those metaphors imagine wedding nights are going to just erase that idea from somebody's mind?
Right.
I mean, it's
Preposterous.
not thinking all the way through to what they theoretically might want for a person who does do what they ask, get married, never leave their part. It's
control.
It's control. It certainly is, and it's really infuriating to me. But the other kind, and this can come outside of a religious context or anything too. Of course, it can be an uptight parent or two, or a whole family of them, shaming someone for touching themselves when they were little or whatever it would be. But there's also silence. And silence carries its own shame message.
Yep.
Because if this was okay to talk about, well, then somebody would talk about it.
Yeah.
And you have to be, you pretty much have to go to college to get to a place where somebody without too much drama stands before a group of people and starts to really talk about sexuality.
Right.
And many people don't take those classes or go to the colleges where those classes are even offered.
Right.
So plenty of us don't ever get that.
Yeah.
And I think when we look at all of the Sturm und Drang about queerness and grooming and this and that and the trans folk and all of this stuff is one way for people who are not allowed open, free, communicative sexual discourse to get in on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish it were otherwise, which is one of the reasons that there's no litmus test for who walks in the door of a Good Vibrations except that they have to be over 18. And now, I don't think this occurred to Joni to talk about back in the day, but now when we're doing our staff training, we're like, it doesn't matter what's in people's pants. If somebody wants you to know more about their gender identity and configuration and their parts and stuff, they'll let you know as part of what they communicate their need for when they come in. They want something to put on their penis, then perhaps it will be relevant to know that they have a penis or whatever it may be.
Useful, yeah.
But we don't have to be picturing that. We don't have to be assessing or assigning. None of that is our job. Our job is to give information, and the questions and the statements that the customer is willing to share with us will guide us to hopefully helping them with the exact right stuff.
Yep.
And I just want everyone to understand that the information that you get at a sex toy store, if it's well delivered, is relevant to people of any parts.
Yeah.
Right. The sensation of vibration is about us and our neurology and
Universal.
How we experience touch and this particular sensation. It's not, it's not. We called our items sex toys, of course. They used to be called marital aids.
Oh.
And you don't have to be married, and you don't have to think there's anything that needs to be fixed in order to acquire one or more than one, because we're diverse. Everybody's different. We don't need to put people in boxes. Wouldn't it be nice if nobody felt the need to do that?
I'm going to go back to one thing you said, and maybe we can wrap with this. Maybe this is bold also, but you said, I wish it weren't. We're talking about sort of the forces that are coming. I'm going to argue that you're doing more than wishing. That your life, your work, and Good Vibrations are contra that. But that's not sort of, I feel like it's not necessarily the mission of your life or Good Vibrations to be against something. It's to be for something, right? Positivity. Anyway, and maybe it was just a figure of speech when you said I wish, but I would argue that you're doing more than wishing.
Well, I hope that the balloons we send out, no, not balloons, those aren't good for the environment. The vibes we send out. The compostable balloons that we send out. No, we don't carry balloons. We carry condoms, but not balloons.
You can blow up condoms with helium.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they do, people too. I've seen this happen. I've seen it made into water balloons.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You only have to take a dish of condoms to one public event in your entire career to see the water balloons start to be thrown.
Yep.
If there's anybody between the age of 8 and 12 that can grab one of those out of the dish and run into the restroom, it'll happen. I feel like it's a natural law. But aside from that, the vibes that we send out, you're right, are intended to affect what's possible, regardless of whether anybody catches one and gets the message from it, oh, I must go to that store and acquire a sex toy. That's not the message, although it's a wonderful effect that keeps us around and functioning. We do have a level of social change consciousness that, unlike so much of the social change consciousness that's politicized and divisive, is intended to be relevant to anyone over 18 who can use it, because it's really probable that plenty of the people who are acting in ways that feel painful to us and to the concerns that we have for our diverse customer base are themselves miserable in many ways. And I don't know if a vibrator would fix any of that.
Right.
But maybe it couldn't hurt. And knowing that there are people who live lives where they are told that they can't change, express themselves, be who they are, do drag in Brazil and then run for Congress, etc.
Yeah.
Means that there's backwash that impacts everyone.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then maybe we can make an alternate space with a little bit of backwash of our own. That sounds unhygienic. I don't mean it to.
It's okay. I get your point.
And that, I think, is I think that was the deep understanding that Joni, I don't know whether she would have said it in those terms, maybe not, but I think that she understood that was what we could do to make a difference. And, since I showed up and so many other amazing people have worked here over the course of the last 4+ decades, we care deeply about the cultural impact of not being shame-based, giving people an alternative to that. And it can mean exploring with toys. It can mean telling your person that you never have thought about toys with and you never will some realness. Mm-hmm. It could show up a lot of different ways. We think it makes the world a better place.
I think these are great places to end our recording. We're at like what I call time, but also I don't want to miss anything major. If there's anything you want to get in.
One more thing.
Let's do it.
There's an example of what we've just talked about that is one of the things that we're best known for outside of our zones of influence in the towns that we occupy with stores. The National Masturbation Month, which we created in 1995, just a few months after then Surgeon General Joycelyn Elders had been fired by Bill Clinton for saying one little tiny sensible thing about masturbation. Just a sensible little thing. It might have been a setup for all we know. I do know that Bill Clinton maybe should have been masturbating more. It's hard to, I don't really know, but anyway, we made National Masturbation Month to talk back to this shame specifically about masturbation, because of course if masturbation is completely not okay to talk about or do, we've got a lot of people that we have to turn away from the door, for heaven's sake. This is an empowerment thing, mm-hmm. as far as we were concerned, but it was also, we need to talk back up to the culture that says, well, of course she said a thing. She can't be Surgeon General anymore. It's like, people, she was the first African-American Surgeon General and the most sensible human being on the planet. I have met this woman. She is so, we should just let her run the things. Yeah. I think that would be a great idea. So we took up the mantle of trying to help people think about and talk about masturbation more and better, more comfortably, less shamefully. And out of that grew years and years of action, including talking to drive time radio shock jocks. That was my job. That was a lot of fun. Oh. And my favorite was when we shared with our other friendly sex toy store community what we were doing, and the people in Toronto took it over to do a masturbation challenge between, I believe it was the police and the fire department.
Oh, okay.
So don't ever say anything bad about Canada to me. I love those people.
Something about, Canada.
Oh, Canada. Not blame Canada. Oh, no.
When is Masturbation Month?
Masturbation Month is May, the merry month of May. It's alliterative, and it's also as soon as we were able to get our promo materials and our thoughts together after I think it was the December 94 firing of Dr. Elders.
Got it.
So we just went forward from there. I am in the Masturbation Hall of Fame. I'm very honored. Okay. Which we created.
Yeah.
But that's not why. I mean, I think I earned my position.
Is that a physical space or online?
No, sadly, it was online. It was we would every year we would induct a few more. Mostly it was celebrities who said something clever, cute, or meaningful about masturbation, but also the sex educators. Yeah. Joni Blank was in, of course. She started this. Of course, she deserved her role. Betty Dodson, mother of masturbation, but also a couple of men who were starting to talk about masturbation as a profound way for men to connect with themselves. And of course, that's not part of actual male sexual socialization either, even for the guys who have learned that that's a profound thing. Great for them, but that's not what they learned in the locker room. So yay to the guys who stepped up to try to deepen men's relationship to themselves sexually. Right. Couldn't hurt. Unless, as we used to say, when we did the Masturbate-a-thon, people would be like, wait a minute, what's that? I was like, well, it's like a walk-a-thon, except you don't do it in a big mass through a Golden Gate Park. You do it alone, usually, maybe with your best friend or whoever you're masturbating with already, fine. But you do raise money for charity by asking appropriate people if they would like to sponsor you. And at the end of the masturbate-a-thon, no matter how much money you have raised, your feet don't hurt unless you masturbate in an unusual way. And if that's the case, I would very much like to interview you.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to wrap.
I think so.
Thank you. Oh my God, that was so fun.